Hello there, my name is Vedera. Today let's look at entities in more detail. What are they? It's a domain object defined primarily by its identity. We're going to see that in a few. They have a life cycle that can easily change their content. A thread of continuity must always be maintained with all these changes that are going to take place in an entity. We're going to see an example of this. We have two students, ID number 17. They both have ID number 17. They both have the same name. By virtue of them having the same name, first of all, tells us it could be the same person. But more importantly, the ID is also the same. In this case, we've chosen ID as our identity. We could have chosen something else like name, but in this system, we're using ID as our identity. So that tells us we have the same name we're dealing with. We are the same student. The class has transitioned. Earlier it was 5P and now the student is in class 6P. So we've seen that state change. And last but not least, they've also changed the activities that they're taking part in. Before they were in football, now they just want to play tennis. This is still the same person. This is something that is very common where we have such objects that will change. They're different from different transitions. There'll be, for instance, if I'm dealing with a student, I can also have this student have new activities they've taken. They could be just in addition to football, they could also be wanting to play tennis. They could have different meal restrictions. A lot of things change in the life cycle of some of our domain objects, and an entity is where best to place them. We have another example here. We have ID number 20 and ID number 13. They look very similar. They have the same name, that is Njoki. They're in the same class, that is 5J, and they're also participating in drama. So they have these three activities that are common to them, but they're not the same person because the ID is different. One is 20, the other one is 13. So always be keen to pick an identity that will be unique within the system. Design a domain concept as an entity when these are the cases to do that. When we care about its individuality, if that's important, and also when distinguishing it from everything else is mandatory. If you don't care about distinguishing it from everything else, don't model it as an entity. Some useful tips when modeling entities. The identities must be defined for easier tracking. Their representations, these will be the associations they have, the definitions in classes, in methods, whatever you're using actually, their attributes, their associations, all of them should revolve around who this entity, who they are. That is, if for instance we're dealing with a student, everything needs to be pertaining what a student is. The student entity in this case. Identities are meaning superimposed because it is useful. We've seen how that is important. Let's go back to an example again when trying to determine what type of identity to use. We have, for instance, in our case, we could have used ID or we could have used name. These are both valid identifiers. Of course, we roll out class 5J because there's a possibility of so many people in this class, so that is not unique to the student, maybe at the class level. We also roll out activities because an activity can have many students participating in it. Same case where one student can participate in many activities. In this case, of course, these are not valid identifiers. So in our example here, ID or name are each valid, and you will pick which one works for you depending on the application. If you have a situation where name is very valid, as is unique enough, you won't have cases of having a different name in the same system, then you can use name in this case. Let's look at how to model entities effectively. The basic functionality is establishing continuity to ensure a clear and predictive behavior. That is one thing to note. Also, only add behavior essential to the concept plus only attributes required by that behavior. Identifying attribute must be unique within the system. We've seen that. We have two different types of identities we can use within our system. We have a system generated one, for instance, a student registration number or a student ID, whatever you're calling it. This is usually something that is auto-generated by the system. It can be an integer, that is an ID. It can be a random, it can be a UUID, that is a universal UUID, a GUID, whatever you use, but something that is actually being generated by the system, the user is not providing it. The other example, of course, is a user-provided one. Examples of these are, if you're using name, then the name is that, the national ID, the telephone, a social security number, a student registration number in the case where we're using this in another system. For instance, looking at our student management system, the student already has a student registration number. If we are now modeling a system for the library, we don't have to specifically auto-generate another ID specifically for the library. In this case, since we can guarantee uniqueness, we're dealing with the same people most of the time, then we can guarantee that if you give me the student registration number you have that is school-wide, then I can use that as a unique identifier in my library system. So in this case, it is still generated by another system, but it is user provided. That gives the uniqueness within the system. Those are two types of identities you can use. If ID is user provided, uniqueness is a user's responsibility. If we're expecting our users to be the ones giving us these identities, then in this case, they need to give us unique ones and it is their responsibility. However, the system should still handle exceptions because we do expect users to make mistakes. And because of that, then we just need to account for that. What are some challenges when dealing with user-generated identities? For one, let's talk about the phone number. The individual may change their number. For instance, I'm modeling maybe even a movie tracking system where I rent movies or I sell movies and it's important for me to track my customers. In this case, a phone number is a valid thing to use. But what happens when this person changes their phone number? What happens when they have more than one phone number and this time they use one, that time they use a different one? And that introduces an issue that we had not accounted for. In this case, always choose an identity that is and will stay unique in your system. Another example is national IDs. This is mostly common in government system where I already have my national ID, but then now when I'm going to use another different government system, they'll just now use the national ID as my identity in that other system when I'm the entity in this case. A problem with that is important PII is being given randomly. For instance, if I'm required to do that in hospitals, even sometimes in government organizations, you don't always know which ones have. Well, you really have no option, but the reality is many people are not very happy giving such PII. So that's something to be very aware of. And last but not least, if we're going to use the name, for instance, for the case of student, we have cases where we'll have different people with the same name, and even if we go a step ahead to have a first name, a last name, so that we diverge the paths, we can even have a surname where someone has as many as 3 phone names. There will still be cases where we'll have that issue. Now, if we're going to use a human way of doing things, we can differentiate people by, oh, give me the tall Waithera, give me the short Waithera, then that's something that people understand, but the system cannot use such ways of differentiating, so we have to give them unique identities to use so that the system, of course, is going to be useful. And that's it on entities. Thank you for watching. Bye.